I'm supposed to say something about the understanding of the East. It's impossible for anybody to really understand the East. It is so large. In fact, I once asked a very well-known professor, T.R.V. Murthy, highly regarded, that there are so many sacred texts in India. Does he know anybody who ever read all of them? He said, that is possible, but I have never met anybody who has read all the sacred texts in India. So when I speak about the understanding of the East, it's a very minor little version of the East. East is enormously large. And another thing I want to say here, you probably all know this, that Gurdjieff called himself a Hindu when he published his, in the beginning of the 20th century, Struggle of the Magicians. The word Hindu or India, neither one of them come from the Indian languages. What the so-called Hindus call their religion is Sanatana Dharma, which literally means eternal law. And anybody who connects with that, such as Christ or Rumi, officially they are Hindus. So possibly Gurdjieff could rightly call himself a Hindu, which is what he did. So one needs to understand that Hindu doesn't refer to any particular historical person or a particular historical text. It is really a call to connect with Sanatana Dharma, eternal law. But quite understandably, everywhere, serious ideas go downhill. This is the law of seven doesn't stop working just because Gurdjieff has died. it always works. So some of the major ideas in any religious tradition, ideas or practices gradually go downhill. And so I specifically would take 2 or 3 examples which Gurdjieff specifically refers to. Kunda buffer. He's especially talking about the idea of Kundalini, which is basically something arising really from the sexual center, as if this is going to make one enlightened gradually. And this notion has been by serious yoga teachers, for example, in the Yajnavalkya in the 10th century, or even modern yoga teachers like Deshikachar, who was the son of the greatest yoga teacher in the 20th century. They point out that Kundalini is basically leading to avidya, ignorance. However, at the ordinary level, it has been highly regarded as a way of connecting with enlightenment. Everywhere, ideas go downhill. So quite rightly, Gurdjieff points out that, by the way, he actually refers to Kundalini as Kundalina in Beelzebub. And then from there comes the idea of the Kunda buffer, trying to point out that this is really an obstruction rather than something helpful. Another thing that he, as you know, he calls his teaching as Haida Yoga. Why refer to it as yoga? Haida literally means, I gather in Russian, it means quick yoga. Something that one can very easily accomplish, not easily, but quickly accomplish. But again, I just want to point out, if you look at any of the serious yoga practitioners, like Raman Maharishi, or Vivekananda, or Aurobindo, they are obviously trying to point out exactly the enormous requirement of the practices in yoga, including practically all the things that Gurdjieff will speak about as necessary for practice. However, it is true that at an ordinary level, naturally things are always, how can I quickly get some result from this? Most people who practice yoga, especially I notice this, there are many yoga schools in North America here, in the USA, they are just trying to increase their sex appeal. There's not any harm in this, but that is not the purpose of yoga. As I just mentioned, if you look at any serious yoga teachers in contemporary times, like Iyengar or Deshikachar, these are also more or less emphasizing physical yoga, but the ones who have actually seriously engaged with yoga, like Vivekananda, Raman, Aurobindo, I mentioned. So there are many aspects of yoga which are constantly forgotten, but this is true of every teaching. I actually keep asking, seriously, I ask even myself, referring to any of the practitioners of the Guruji who work as Haida Yogi, how many of them have come to the level of Madame de Salzman or Guruji? Everywhere there is a natural tendency, and the obvious laws are applicable, that every great idea gets practiced or understood at a lower and lower level, at a more larger cosmological level. Same thing has happened with India or in India. And then one of the ideas of Guruji, which people who are opposed to him make as a kind of a joke, and those who are sort of favorites are following Guruji's, people regard this is a wonderful idea, namely that the moon is eating human beings. It can be taken both ways by people who think how ridiculous an idea. I simply want to point out to you the oldest Upanishad, Brihadaranyaka Upanishad, mentions exactly this, except that in the Indian tradition, not everybody is a food for the moon. There are some of them go to the sun. Those who are accomplished or exalted human beings, they go to the sun, and they are naturally. This is one of the great texts that says that as one goes to the sun door, he will be asked, "Who are you?" If the answer is anything other than nobody, he may not enter. A complete freedom from me. That is the fundamental requirement to understand anything serious. Most of you since probably come from the Judeo-Christian background. Let me remind you a remark of Christ. Unless you leave yourself behind, you cannot be a follower of mine. This is the Gospel of Matthew. So I just wanted to point out here that this idea of moon-eating human being, first of all, this is in twofold, sun on the moon, and very strong emphasis, especially emphasis in the Kaushtaki Brahman Upanishad, that the moon eats human beings, then puts them out as rain, so they are reincarnated later on in different. And there, after mentioning this, at the end, the question is, who are you? The answer is, I am you. Then he's allowed to enter the door. That oneness with the divine, that is the call. But always a tendency that I need to get ahead, I need to get a Nobel Prize, or that is quite natural human tendencies, and one need not imagine that it is only in the West or only in the East. This is throughout human general, everywhere in the world. So for me personally, having, even my friends hardly find it believable, I ended up teaching courses in the university, in the physics department, in the philosophy department, in the religion department. But then I decided that I needed to actually practice something rather than to teach about something. For me, I actually asked Jean de Salzman, who was my teacher for many years, I can write something about God, give talks about God, or what people have said about God, but how do I touch God? For me, that is much more important than reading about God, talking about God, writing about God. And her response was, which actually brought tears to my eyes. She asked me, if God were right here and he was touching you, what would you do to invite him not only to touch you, but to see that he's embracing you? That, from my point of view, is the real call for any spiritual practice, which I invite you people to see if you can connect with. Otherwise, one can talk about this or that. As I said, I have taught in many places, many departments, but I'm happy to be free of that now. Thank you.